Tate and Rolf, well, more Tucker and Tate, everyone knew them as violent. And when they were selling drugs, they were too loud, too high profile, and they didn't care. If anyone, made any comments, they used to just beat them up. And that concerned, Mick Still, who I worked for, because they were attracting too much of attention. And it was only a matter of time before they, attracted the attention onto us and got us nicked.
All day long I'd been dying for a beer. I got this new contract working down at a site near Heathrow Airport, which was paying good money, but meant getting up at 5 in the morning and driving more than 100 miles. We'd finish quite early, and I'd normally be home by 6, but the days are still pretty exhausting. After a long hard day, the only way I can unwind is to go down the pub for a few pints. Most of the time that was okay, but every now and again Sandra would kick up a fuss and have a go at me for not spending enough time with her and the kids. When that happened, I'd stay in for a couple of nights, make sure I got in the way. Then they'd practically be begging me to go down to the pub, so she could have some peace and quiet. I've been a good boy for the past 2 nights, even helping out with housework and stuff like that, and now I was getting to get my reward. I was going down to my local, have a couple of games of pool, and get completely and utterly plastered. At around 2 PM, just as I was finishing for the day, Mick called me up on my mobile and asked me to meet him at Mark's Tay as soon as possible. It was a place we'd met up a few times, because basically it's roughly halfway between our 2 houses, but it made a detour on my way home, and therefore a delay in me getting the beers in. Mick didn't say why he wanted to meet, so I assumed it was something to do with drugs. Either another run he wanted me to go on, or some new stock he wanted me to sell. I was really tempted to say I couldn't make it, but I didn't want to let him down. I've been doing a lot of work on his house during the evenings at the weekends. I didn't want to risk losing the extra income. At first, I said I'd meet him about 4 PM, then I changed it to 5 PM, because that way I knew I'd have time for a couple of quick beers on the way. It'd really give me a taste for it, but I hadn't had anywhere near enough. I'd only teased my taste buds. As I parked up, I started hoping that whatever it was that Mick wanted, it wouldn't take too long, so I could get home and get on with some serious drinking. After a few minutes, I saw a familiar red Hilux pull up, and I went over and got in the passenger side. Mick started telling me that him and Pat had finally sorted their differences out, and it was planning to meet him that evening. Apparently a plane with a motherload of cocaine was going to be landing in some field, and they were going to meet it for some kind of deal. Sounds good, I said. So what do you want me to do? Mick explained that my role was to drive Jack down to the meeting place, and then pick the 2 of them up afterwards. I want Pat to think that I'm meeting him on my own, he told me. Now, this is the point in the story where people start saying to me, didn't you think it was all a bit odd? Weren't there alarm bells ringing in your head? The answer was, I'm afraid to say no. As far as I'm concerned, there was a cocaine deal going down between Pat and Mick. I knew by now Pat was a bit of a loose cannon, especially after the pizza incident, and was not averse to ripping people off, even his friends. Now, it was unlikely he'd try anything with Mick, but if it was me, I would have played it the same way. Rather than going to meet him with some money, I'd have had someone holding it nearby, just to make sure it wasn't a trap. I didn't see anything wrong with it at all. As Mick and I were talking, Jack pulled up behind in his tatty old VW Passat that I'd actually sold to Mick a couple of weeks earlier. Jack came up to say a quick hello, then we all set off towards the halfway house pub. Me and Mick in the Hilux, and Jack following behind. On the way, Mick explained that when we got a bit nearer, we would pull over so I could get in the Passat with Jack. Mick didn't want us to be seen, otherwise Tate would realise he had company. Once I was in the other car, Jack would tell me exactly what to do. Just before we got to the pub, we stopped at the entrance to the country park, and Mick told me to get in the Passat with Jack, who turned the car around, then produced a set of false number plates with double-sided sticky tape on them. He tried to stick them over the existing plates, but it was too damp and wet, so eventually he gave up. I got into the driver's seat and told him to head to the halfway house and wait close to the exit of the car park. From where we were, we had a clear view of the car park entrance, and we could see all the cars coming in. We also could see Mick's Hilux, parked over the other side of the pub, but no signs of Mick. What are we waiting for? I asked Jack. There was no reply. It was pretty cold, so I kept the engine running to stop the windows steaming up and stop us freezing, but I knew a better way of staying warm. Hey, I said, while we're waiting, let's go in the pub and have a couple of beers. Jack slowly turned his head and looked at me. No, he said firmly. I suppose I wasn't all that surprised. Jack wasn't just teetotal, he was some kind of freak. All he ever drank was water and orange juice. He didn't touch anything fizzy, and he wouldn't even go near tea or coffee. His only vice was chocolate. He ate Galaxy bars like they were going out of fashion. All of a sudden Jack said, "Right, off we go." As I pulled away, I looked towards the car park entrance and saw a dark blue coloured Range Rover coming in. I couldn't see who was inside, but I assumed it was Pat's car. We set off down the A130, and Jack said he was going to show me where to drop him off and pick him up, and that I was to leave him there and come back when he rang me as soon as they had completed the deal. I drove over to the Retton Turnpike, still on the A130 towards Chelmsford. I went up the hill towards Retton Village and was bombing down the other side when Jack told me to slow down, as we would be soon doing a right turn. He pointed out to this tiny little lane ahead and told me to turn into it and turn the car around immediately. I did as I was told and watched as Jack got out of the car and took some stuff off the back seat. He took a coat, a prison junkie jacket with a plastic bit on the back cut off, and a big canvas sausage bag. As Jack was walking away, I asked him if I had time for a quick beer while he was gone. "What are you? Some kind of alcoholic? We won't be long. Just fuck off and wait. And when you come back, turn around straight away again so we can head off straight away." And then he vanished into the darkness. I checked my phone and saw that I wasn't picking up much of a signal, so I decided to move. I ended up driving up past the lane and then took the first turning on the left. I went down a little way and turned around, so I ended up parked up a bit of a hill. I looked at the phone again to check the signal, and at that very moment it started ringing. It was Jack. "Come and get us," he said. "That was quick," I replied, but the line had already gone dead. He'd hung up. I retraced my steps, pulled into the lane, and immediately turned the car around. Almost straight away, Jack was at the back door of the car and got in, sitting in the darkness. "Where's Mick?" I asked. "Won't be long. He's dropped something. Doesn't want to leave it there," said Jack. Then he made this really weird sound, a bit like a series of quiet little snorts. I could just make out his silhouette in the rearview mirror, and his big shoulders were bobbing up and down. It took me a little while to work out what was going on. Jack was giggling. I was still looking at Jack in the rearview mirror when Mick appeared and opened the front passenger door. As soon as he did, the interior light went on, and that's when I saw Jack's hands. He was wearing surgical gloves, and had been splashed with streaks of blood. On the back of one hand was a lump of greyish slime, surrounded by lumps of hair and skin and more blood. "Turn that fucking light out now," screamed Mick. I didn't think. I went into autopilot and started scrambling about on the roof of the car trying to find the light switch. But as Mick sat down, he shut the door and the light went off anyway. And suddenly, it was pitch black again. But I could still see Jack's hands. I could still see the blood and bits of brain. And I felt like someone had sucked all the air out of me because I wanted to speak. I desperately wanted to say something, but no matter how much I tried, I just couldn't get any words out. Mick told me to get going, and then my mind was elsewhere. My body somehow obeyed, putting the car into gear and moving off towards the main road. From then on, everything happened in slow motion. I saw the headlights, heard the screech of tyres, and braced myself for the impact, but it never came. Mick had grabbed the steering wheel at the last moment and wrenched it to one side, avoiding a crash by just a few inches. The other driver flashed his lights and swore at me out of his half-open window. I just pulled out onto the main road without looking, but I honestly didn't know where I was or what I was doing. I just sat there like a zombie. "For fuck's sake, Darren, drive carefully," said Mick. "What are you trying to do, kill us all?" Jack, sitting behind, thumped the back of the seat with his fist. "Fucking arsehole," he growled. I was still in shock, but I felt myself slowly coming back down to earth. I mumbled a half-hearted apology and carried on driving back towards the Retton Turnpike. All at once I felt like I was going to be sick, that I had a splitting headache, and that I was freezing cold and boiling hot. My mind was racing, but it kept coming back to the fact that I'd only been away for a couple of minutes. Surely they didn't have time to do anything. I desperately wanted to know exactly what had happened back there, but at the same time, I desperately didn't want to know anything about it at all. I just couldn't take it in. I wanted to pretend that I hadn't seen anything or heard anything, but it wasn't going to happen. Mick turned to Jack and broke the silence. "Those cunts won't be threatening us again," he said. "Too right," came the reply. I was trying to concentrate on the road when a glint of metal caught my eye. I chanced a sideways glance and saw that Mick was passing Jack the barrels of a sawn-off shotgun. followed by the stock and the trigger mechanism. And then it got worse. Jack moved forward, so he was sitting with his head between the front two seats, just the way that naughty kids do when they're little, and he and Mick started going over the details of what they'd done. "I tell you, Darren, it was well funny," he said with a grin. "'Cause Mick shot one of them, and his gun fell apart. Bits all over the place. That's what he was looking for. The thing he dropped. I couldn't believe it. There we were, trying to do a job. He spends half the time on the floor trying to find a fucking barrel." By now, Mick was smiling too. "Did you shoot the back window by mistake?" he asked. Jack shook his head. "No, I think Pat must have done it with his hand. I never miss. Not from that distance anyway." Then Jack turned to Mick. "You should have seen him, Darren. It was pathetic. Hard man. Squealing like a baby he was." I had absolutely no idea what to say or what to do. How do you respond to something like that? I felt as if I was no longer in the car, just a spectator looking on and listening in. All I could think was, what the fuck am I doing here? What's going to happen now? Mick spoke again. "Hey, you never believe it, Jack. That supper cow Sarah, she only phoned Pat's mobile just as we was going down the fucking lane. All that talk about how she hates him, wants him out of her life, and how pleased she'd be if something bad happened to him. And then there they are, having this lovey-dovey chat. Made me want to throw up. Actually, I was shitting myself. I was just waiting for him to say, 'I'm here with Mick and some of the lads.' And that would have been it. I'd have had to call the whole thing off. But he never did, thank fuck. I bet she'd kick herself if she knew how close she'd come to saving him." Jack grunted in agreement, and Mick continued. "Mind you, don't know how I'd have stopped you. When we got to the bottom of the lane, and the gate was locked, I didn't have a clue where the fuck you were until you handed me the gun and started shooting. I thought we'd blown it." I heard myself speak, my voice soft and low. "I hope I never upset the two of you." For some reason, Mick and Jack thought this was hilarious. The two of them fell apart, absolutely pissing themselves. "Nah," chuckled Mick, wiping away tears of laughter. "You're not like them. Wouldn't happen to you." Although I knew the roads reasonably well, the state I was in meant that Mick and Jack had to give me instructions for every turn, like I was some learner driver. Left at the swimming pool shop, left at the first set of traffic lights, down at the bottom, second on the right, into the car park of the Hungry Horse pub. I spotted Mick's Toyota Hilux pick up in a corner and pulled up the Passat alongside. It was only when I tried to stand up that I realised how much I was shaking. Jack and Mick jumped out and started changing their clothes. They were still really animated, talking quickly, but I was no longer listening to what they were saying. It was then that I noticed for the first time that they were wearing identical outfits, dark green boiler suits, Wellington boots, and surgical rubber gloves, all of which were stuffed into a couple of bin liners and placed in the back of the truck. As I stood watching them, I tried to throw up, but nothing came out. Jack took the Passat and drove off, while Mick got into the Hilux and waved me into the passenger seat. Then we set off for Mark's Tay, while my own car was waiting. As soon as Jack had gone, Mick's mood changed. He was quieter, more thoughtful. He was obviously going over the evening's event in his mind. And then after a few minutes of silence, he suddenly said, "Jack's a cold-hearted bastard." "What do you mean?" I asked. The second I got out of the Range Rover, he leaned in with the pump action and shot the three of them. Boom, boom, boom. Just like that. Like it was nothing to worry about. He was just so detached, so emotionless. It was like he was serving up chips or something. I mean, he could have been doing anything, but we had to do it together, you see. That way one of us could never give evidence against the other. We'd both be equally guilty. That was the deal. I said nothing. All day long I'd been dying for a beer, but now all I could think about was drinking half a bottle of whiskey to blot everything out. I suggested we both went for a drink or three. At first, Mick agreed, but by the time we got to Mark's Tay, he'd changed his mind and said it would be best if we went straight home. I knew my wife and kids were expecting me, but I just couldn't face them. Pulled out my mobile and phoned my mate Rick. Told him I'd be having a shitty day and asked him to meet me down the pub. He stayed for a couple and we talked about any old bollocks, but then he had to go home to his girlfriend. In the end, I just stayed there on my own, sitting in a corner and drinking myself into an absolute stupor.